Life on this land has never been easy. As a rancher in the wilds of the West, I've grown accustomed to long days of solitude, endless months spent herding cattle and facing the harshness of nature. For 37 years, I've encountered danger more times than I can count, especially as a white man living near Native American tribes. The tension between us has always been palpable, with my neighbors warning me to keep my distance from them. But despite the constant danger, I always believed that if I kept to myself, life would remain peaceful. That was, until the day everything changed. It was a hot summer day in 1847 when I followed a blood trail that led me toward my water well. What I saw there would forever alter the course of my life. A native warrior, battered and covered in blood, lay crumpled against the stone wall of my well. His face was a mask of pain, and the wound in his side was deep and fresh. His eyes, though clouded with agony, locked onto mine. He wasn't an enemy or a threat, but a man in need of help, struggling to hold on to life. As a rancher, I had seen many animals in distress, but I had never witnessed the desperation in a man's eyes like I saw in his. The thirst I saw in him was the same thirst I had once felt years ago during a drought when I went without water for days, thinking I might not survive. That memory, that feeling of helplessness stirred within me, and I knew deep down that I couldn't turn away from him. Despite every instinct in me screaming to grab my rifle and protect myself, I lowered the gun and reached for the bucket. I wasn't thinking about the consequences or the danger I was putting myself in. I just knew that this man, this warrior, needed water. His need for survival transcended the animosity between our peoples. That was the moment when everything shifted for me. I wasn't just saving a man's life, I was saving my own humanity. As I watched him drink, I knew that what I was doing would change both of our lives forever. It wasn't just about a cup of water, it was about an act of mercy in a world that often knows only hatred. I didn't care what others might think or say. In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to act from the heart, not from fear or prejudice. When the warrior drank the water, I could see the color slowly returning to his face, his body starting to regain some strength. This man was more than just a wounded soldier. He was a symbol of something much larger. Something I hadn't yet fully understood. He was part of a people that had suffered greatly, a people who had been driven to fight, to survive. But even in his pain, I saw something else, a deep, unyielding dignity. I didn't know it at the time, but this man was Ayana, the son of a respected Apache chief, one of the key figures responsible for negotiating peace between the native tribes and the settlers. He was no ordinary warrior. Ayana was a leader, someone who held the weight of his people's hopes on his shoulders. And yet, despite the political power he carried, he was vulnerable, just like any other man. He was a man who understood that true strength wasn't just in battle, but in the ability to make peace. When Ayana spoke of the conspiracy against him, of the betrayal and the lies that had put him in this position, I listened intently. It became clear that this was no simple case of survival. It was a story of injustice, a story of someone being hunted for revealing the truth. He wasn't just trying to save his own life, he was trying to protect a fragile peace between two worlds that had been at war for centuries. His strength wasn't just physical, it was moral, political, and spiritual. As Ayana spoke, I began to see him not as an enemy, but as a man caught in a system of corruption and violence. He wasn't fighting for power, but for justice. I realized that this wasn't just about one man's survival, but about something much bigger. I was no longer just a rancher, I was part of something that could change the course of history. Ayana wasn't just a warrior, he was a peacemaker, a man of wisdom who understood that violence could only take them so far. I began to understand that, despite our differences, we shared a common humanity. The blood that ran through his veins was not so different from mine, and for the first time, I saw beyond the stereotypes I had been raised with. I saw a man who had sacrificed so much for peace, and I realized that my small act of kindness, giving him water, was just the beginning of a much greater journey. When Marshal Dixon Webb and his men arrived at my ranch, I knew that I was no longer facing just a personal threat. Webb wasn't just any lawman. He was a man who represented the darkest side of the law. He was ruthless, cold, and unyielding. His reputation preceded him, a man who cared nothing for justice and everything for maintaining power. Webb didn't see people as individuals. He saw them as obstacles to be removed. And the native people, in his eyes, were nothing more than savages to be hunted down. As I stood there, trying to keep my composure, I could feel the pressure building in the air. Webb wasn't here for a simple search. He was here to finish what he had started, to eliminate Ayana and ensure that the truth never came to light. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about one man's life. It was about a larger conspiracy, one that stretched all the way to the highest levels of government. When Webb looked at the bloodstains near the well, I could see the suspicion in his eyes. He was too sharp to miss the evidence, too clever to be deceived by simple lies. And in that moment, I knew that Ayana's fate rested in my hands. Webb wasn't just a lawman, he was part of a corrupt system that thrived on exploitation and violence. He was the kind of man who would stop at nothing to protect his interests, even if it meant killing an innocent man. And as he stood there, I saw something in his eyes, something I hadn't expected: fear. When he asked me if I had seen any Indians around, his tone was flat, controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. Webb wasn't just following orders, he was trying to cover up a larger truth. And deep down, I could sense it. This wasn't just about catching a fugitive, this was about silencing a voice that threatened to expose the real criminals. Webb's men were no different from him at first. They had been following his orders blindly, like soldiers in a battle they didn't understand. But as Ayana's words unfolded, something shifted in the air. Deputy Bradley, a young man I had seen with Webb for years, suddenly spoke up. His voice cracked with uncertainty, but it was enough. He had seen something that didn't make sense, something that had been gnawing at him for months. He had seen the truth. As Bradley stood there, I could see the doubt in the other men's eyes. They had all followed Webb blindly, just as I had once followed the path set before me. But now, the truth was out, and they had no choice but to confront it. It wasn't about law anymore. It was about justice. It wasn't about orders. It was about what was right. I watched in awe as the men who had been loyal to Webb began to shift, to question their loyalty. The power of the truth was undeniable. What Ayana had done was remarkable. Without lifting a finger in violence, he had made Webb's men doubt everything they had ever believed. In that moment, they realized that they weren't serving justice. They were serving a corrupt system. They weren't lawmen. They were pawns in a much larger game. And as the men of Webb's crew began to turn, I knew that this was no longer just a fight between me and Ayana versus Webb. It was a fight for the soul of the territory. And in that fight, truth was the most powerful weapon. This story is not just about a rancher and a native warrior. It's about the choices we make in life. We all face moments when we must choose between fear and compassion, between self-preservation and doing what's right. I could have turned away from Ayana. I could have let him die, told Webb that I had seen nothing, but I didn't. And because I didn't, everything changed. Ayana didn't just teach me about courage. He taught me that real strength lies in mercy. In this world, it's easy to think that power comes from the sword, from the ability to control others. But the true power comes from choosing to act with kindness, from seeing beyond the surface and understanding the humanity in everyone. That's the lesson Ayana taught me. Not through words, but through his actions, his willingness to put the truth above his own life. I learned that justice isn't something that can be enforced by force. It's something that must be earned, something that must come from within. And I realized that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through weapons, but through understanding, compassion, and the courage to do what's right, even when it seems impossible. Ayana, with all his pain and suffering, showed me the way, and in that moment, I knew that the world could change. One act of kindness at a time, one man at a time.